Case 1. The disappearance of Melissa Brannon. It was supposed to be a joyful night, a community Christmas party, filled with laughter, food, and festive cheer. But by the end of the evening, a 5-year-old girl would vanish without a trace, triggering a massive search and unraveling a mystery far darker than anyone expected. Melissa Brannon was born on April 12, 1984, in Texas. After her parents' divorce, her mother, Tammy, moved with her to the quiet town of Lorton, Virginia. It was the kind of place families sought out, peaceful, suburban, and friendly. Tammy found work as an accountant and rented an apartment in a modest complex on the town's edge. The community was tight-knit, with frequent events for residents, especially the children. Melissa, only 5 at the time, thrived there. She spent her days playing with neighborhood kids and eagerly joined the Friday and holiday gatherings that brought everyone together. On December 3rd, the complex hosted a Christmas celebration in a separate building with multiple halls. Around 200 residents attended, enjoying dinner and festive activities. Melissa, like many of the children, ran about joyfully while adults mingled. As the evening wore on, around 10 p.m., Tammy told Melissa it was time to go. She asked her daughter to fetch their jackets while she said goodbye to friends. Melissa also asked if she could take some chips home. Tammy said yes, but minutes later, Melissa hadn't come back. Tammy began to search. First casually, then with growing urgency, she checked each hall, the hallway, asked guests, but no one had seen her daughter. Panic set in. Neighbors joined the search, combing through the building and outside. Still, no sign of Melissa. Tammy called the police. Officers arrived quickly and began an immediate search of the area. Word spread fast. Soon, over 300 volunteers were involved, scouring every corner of the complex and beyond. Melissa Brannon had simply vanished into thin air, and the investigation that followed would uncover unsettling truths that shocked the entire community. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. At first, police hoped Melissa had simply wandered off, maybe stepped outside in the middle of the excitement and gotten lost. But as the hours passed, that theory started to unravel. It was cold and dark that night. Not a time or place where a 5-year-old could easily go far unnoticed. And Melissa knew the complex well. Even at her age, she wouldn't have strayed too far from familiar ground. Complicating the search was the dense forest directly behind the apartment complex. There was a real chance she could have ended up in those woods. Officers and volunteers combed the building where the party had taken place, but came up with nothing. Melissa's jacket was gone, suggesting she had left at some point, but no other clue pointed to where, how, or with whom. One detail did catch the investigators' attention: an open window in the building's boiler room. Maybe she'd climbed out, but that seemed unlikely. Small, yes, but not impossible. Still, it raised more questions than it answered. With no physical trace of Melissa, the investigation turned to the people. Police began interviewing everyone at the party. No one recalled seeing Melissa leave or noticing anyone with her. Tammy, her mother, reported nothing unusual that evening. She'd never had problems with anyone in the complex. No grudges, no strange encounters. Nothing. Naturally, police looked into Melissa's father. Parental abduction is a common lead in such disappearances, but that too went nowhere. He was confirmed to be in Texas, nowhere near Virginia at the time. Running out of options, investigators widened the search. Officers pushed into the woods behind the complex, while others checked every building nearby. Hundreds of residents stayed out late, helping however they could. But it was all in vain. Melissa had simply vanished. By early morning, with no progress, police made the call to send volunteers home. Then they pivoted to a new strategy, knocking on every door in the complex. Nearly 400 residents lived there, and that night, police spoke to every one of them. No one had seen anything. No one had answers. So investigators asked a different question. Had anyone noticed anything strange lately? Anything unusual, even if it didn't seem connected? That's when something finally surfaced. Their first real lead. As detectives pressed residents for anything unusual, several women came forward with unsettling stories. Caleb Hughes, a 23-year-old maintenance worker at the complex, had made them uncomfortable that night. He flirted aggressively, made crude remarks, and didn't seem to care that most of them were with their husbands. Parents had also noticed something off. Hughes seemed overly interested in the children, watching them more closely than anyone felt was normal. Alarmed, investigators circled back to Tammy. Had she noticed anything strange about Hughes? She had. During the party, he approached her multiple times to chat, always steering the conversation toward Melissa. At one point, he even offered to take Melissa to the restroom so Tammy wouldn't have to leave the event. She declined. That interaction stood out. So police set out to speak with Hughes directly, but he was nowhere to be found. Officers drove to his home just a few miles away. His wife answered the door. Hughes, she said, hadn't come home that night. They left, but returned a few hours later. This time he was there. He told them he'd arrived around 12:30 a.m., but the math didn't add up. Hughes had left the complex around 10 p.m. It should have taken him 10 minutes to get home. Instead, he was gone for nearly 2.5 hours. When asked about the delay, he claimed he took a longer route and stopped at a store to buy beer. Police weren't buying it. For starters, a beer run doesn't take nearly 3 hours, and state law prohibited alcohol sales after midnight. Hughes couldn't produce a receipt either. The inconsistencies kept piling up. Officers then asked him to turn over the clothes he'd worn that day. That's when things got even stranger. Hughes admitted he had already thrown them in the washing machine the moment he got home. They pressed further. Eventually, he handed over the clothes. To their surprise, his shoes had also been washed, and not just cleaned, but tampered with. Parts of the soles had been cut off. Mixed in with the clothing were a large knife sheath and a leather belt. When police asked where the knife was, Hughes simply said he couldn't remember. With Hughes's suspicious behavior piling up, investigators grew increasingly convinced he was involved in Melissa's disappearance. They sent his clothes to the lab for analysis. Forensic technicians sprayed luminol on his shoes, and the results were telling. Traces of blood lit up under the chemical. But it was too late. The washing had destroyed most of the evidence. There wasn't enough material left for a proper DNA test. Police brought Hughes in for questioning. Over hours of interrogation, he remained calm and stuck to his story, despite the lies and contradictions. He even claimed not to know Melissa at all, said he'd never seen her, didn't know what she looked like, had no idea what had happened to her. Detectives knew he was lying. Multiple witnesses, including Tammy, had seen him interacting with Melissa that night. They confronted him directly. "We know you're lying." Hughes didn't flinch. His answer was cold. "Prove it." But they couldn't. Not yet. Without physical evidence or a body, they had no choice but to release him the following day. Still, the investigation intensified. Officers expanded the search effort, desperate for a breakthrough. That same morning, detectives decided to speak to Hughes's wife, this time without him present. What she shared changed everything. Their marriage, she admitted, was rocky. She didn't trust him. In fact, before Hughes left for the Christmas party, she had checked the mileage on his car. When he returned, she checked it again. He had driven exactly 12 miles. This detail was critical. First, it didn't line up with his story of a quick store run that somehow took nearly 3 hours. Second, it gave investigators something they hadn't had before: a radius. By subtracting the distance from his home to the apartment complex, police could estimate the area he may have traveled to, and possibly where he had taken Melissa. The result: a 25-square-mile search zone. It was a massive area. To cover it, authorities called in reinforcements: military personnel, criminal analysis units, helicopters, planes, and divers to scan nearby lakes and rivers. Hundreds of volunteers, nearly 400 in total, joined the search. Melissa's father, who had flown in from Texas the moment he heard the news, was among them. Flyers with Melissa's photo and details flooded the region. Thousands were printed and distributed as the desperate search for answers continued. Just 5 months before Melissa vanished, another young girl had gone missing in the same town. Her body was later discovered, but the case remained unsolved. The killer had never been identified. That chilling detail wasn't lost on investigators. As the massive search for Melissa unfolded, a team of forensic experts was dispatched to the apartment complex. Their focus: the only potential lead found early in the case, the open boiler room window. Outside that window, they uncovered something that could change everything. Faint boot prints, adult-sized, traced a path from the building to the parking lot. Crucially, there were no small footprints near them. That suggested Melissa hadn't walked away. She had likely been carried straight to a waiting car. Police had already searched Caleb Hughes's vehicle once, but found nothing. Now, with the FBI officially involved, they stepped up surveillance. Still lacking the evidence to arrest him, agents placed Hughes under 24-hour watch. A judge also ordered him to provide a DNA sample in case anything new surfaced. As they dug into his past, what they found was disturbing. Hughes had a long list of prior arrests stretching back to his teenage years. He had a documented history of alcohol and drug abuse, and worse, he had been suspected multiple times of inappropriate conduct with minors. One discovery stood out. A few years earlier, Hughes had received a suspended sentence for car theft in a neighboring county. But records showed he had violated the terms of his probation. Because of that, a judge revoked the suspended sentence and converted it into active jail time. It wasn't justice for Melissa, but it gave police a legal way to put Hughes behind bars. Meanwhile, the search pressed on, but progress was slow. The landscape itself worked against them. Thick forest blanketed much of the area, and a wide river cut through the region, making the search even more grueling. Then, 2 months after Melissa's disappearance, something completely unexpected happened. Tammy received a phone call. The man on the line claimed to have her daughter. He demanded a ransom, $775,000. Tammy alerted authorities the moment the ransom call came in. FBI agents advised her to cooperate, gather the money, and prepare to meet the caller. A trap was quickly set. Dozens of agents surrounded the drop site and waited. Soon, 2 men approached Tammy. The FBI moved in and made the arrest. But the men had no connection to Melissa. They were university students who'd seen the news and thought they could exploit the situation for easy money. Instead, They got prison time. One was sentenced to 7.5 years, the other nearly 4. Once again, the case hit a wall. Hughes remained the prime suspect, but without physical evidence or a body, there was nothing to hold him on. In a final push, investigators turned back to Hughes's car, this time with advanced forensic tools provided by the FBI. There was just one problem. The car didn't belong to him. It was registered to his wife. They needed her consent. Thankfully, she agreed without hesitation. The forensics team went to work. They applied luminol, and it told them what they feared. Traces of blood appeared on the driver's seat, the pedals, floor mat, steering wheel, even the windshield. But once again, the blood had been cleaned too thoroughly. No usable DNA. Still determined, the experts searched the vehicle for hair fibers and trace evidence, but the interior was a mess. Dirt, trash, and thick layers of dog hair made processing the scene nearly impossible. One forensic technician took a different approach. Using tape, he manually lifted debris from every surface in the vehicle. Everything collected was sent to the FBI crime lab for analysis. At first, it was mostly dog hair, expected since the couple owned 2 large dogs. But then, something stood out. Mixed among the samples was a different type of hair, black rabbit fur. That caught the technician's attention. Further checks confirmed it matched the material of a coat owned by Melissa's mother, Tammy. To confirm their suspicion, forensic experts requested Tammy's coat. Lab tests verified it. The black rabbit fur found in Hughes's car was an exact match. Investigators theorized the fur could have easily transferred to Melissa's clothes when she retrieved their jackets, or from everyday contact. Tammy wore the coat often during winter, and Melissa was always close by. Then came another finding. Among the debris was a single light-colored hair. Analysts compared it to strands from Melissa's hairbrush. It was a match. But the most important discovery was still ahead. The forensic team found numerous tiny red and blue fibers embedded in the car's passenger seat. Melissa had been wearing a red and blue sweater with a matching skirt the night she vanished. Investigators now needed to find that exact outfit to confirm the link. They turned to Melissa's grandmother, who had purchased the clothes, but she couldn't remember the store. Police scoured local retailers, hoping to find a match. Nothing. Meanwhile, one forensic expert couldn't shake the puzzle. How could they prove those fibers came from Melissa's outfit? He brought the question home. While discussing it with his wife, she asked him to describe the clothes. After listening, she had a hunch. They sounded like something from J.C. Penney, a store she often used to shop for their kids. She happened to have a stash of old J.C. Penney catalogs. Determined to help, she began flipping through them. Then, in a Christmas edition from the previous year, she found it. Page 11. The outfit was identical to the one Melissa had worn the night she disappeared. This was the break investigators needed. The red and blue fibers from Hughes's car matched the clothing in the catalog, tightening the case against him. The FBI immediately contacted J.C. Penney, but there was a snag. The outfit had completely sold out. Still, the company offered a solution. Because the outfit was only sold through their catalog, and only 7,000 units had been made, they offered to provide a list of all buyers, giving police a chance to track down one of the sets. Investigators began combing through the J.C. Penney customer list. It was a painstaking process, but persistence paid off. They eventually found a man in Kentucky who had purchased the same outfit for his granddaughter, only to realize he'd ordered the wrong size. The clothing had sat untouched in its original packaging for an entire year. It was a perfect find. The man agreed to send the outfit to the FBI. Forensic experts got to work immediately. This particular model had a distinctive trait. The manufacturer had used a custom, patented shade of dark blue, coded 887, never used in any other clothing line. The FBI compared fibers from the Kentucky outfit to those pulled from Hughes's car. They were a perfect match. That meant someone wearing this exact outfit, one of only 7,000 ever sold, had been inside Hughes's vehicle. It didn't definitively prove Melissa had been there, but the odds of another child wearing the same rare outfit riding in his car were astronomically low. To eliminate any lingering doubt, the lead forensic expert went one step further. He collected over 100 red and blue fibers from different clothing items and ran 7,983 comparative tests. The results were clear. All other samples showed measurable differences, except two: the fiber set from the packaged outfit and those recovered from Hughes's passenger seat. The match was absolute. There was no longer any reasonable chance the fibers came from anyone else. It had to be the same outfit Melissa was wearing the night she disappeared. Even so, detectives knew the challenge ahead. Fiber evidence, no matter how compelling, was still circumstantial. Even when added to the blood traces in Hughes's car, the cut soles of his shoes, and his suspicious behavior, it wasn't a smoking gun. But after nearly 2 months of investigation, they were out of options. They made their move. Caleb Hughes was formally charged with the abduction of Melissa Brannon. Prosecutors argued that Melissa was likely dead, based on the blood evidence found on Hughes's shoes and inside his car. The fibers from her red and blue outfit, discovered on the passenger seat, suggested she may have removed her jacket, possibly under duress. It pointed toward a darker motive. According to the prosecution's theory, Hughes approached Melissa when she went to retrieve the coats at her mother's request. He lured her into the boiler room, perhaps under the guise of helping, then carried her out through the open window and into his car. From there, he drove to an unknown location, killed her, likely using a knife, disposed of the weapon, and hid her body. This, they said, explained his 2.5-hour disappearance the night of the party. He then returned home and immediately tried to cover his tracks, washing his clothes and shoes, even cutting the blood-stained soles of his sneakers. In one final attempt to break the case open, detectives offered Hughes a polygraph test. They hoped that, when confronted with all the mounting evidence, he might finally confess. State law required either the discovery of the victim's body or confirmation of the murder location to pursue a murder charge. Without that, they were limited to charging him with kidnapping, which carried a far lighter sentence. The polygraph results were clear. Hughes showed deception on nearly every critical question. Still, he denied everything. With no confession, no body, and no murder weapon, police moved forward with the only charge they could: kidnapping. The trial began more than 2 years after Melissa's disappearance. Hughes continued to maintain his innocence. His defense attorney tried to discredit the fiber and blood evidence as purely circumstantial, but the prosecution's narrative, carefully constructed and deeply unsettling, left a stronger impression. After just 8 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty. Caleb Hughes was sentenced to the maximum, 50 years behind bars. Caleb Hughes has remained behind bars since his conviction, continuing to deny any involvement in Melissa Brannon's disappearance. Over the years, police launched multiple efforts to locate her remains, but none were successful. 4 years after the trial, a potential lead surfaced. An energy company worker discovered fragments of red fabric in a lake within the original search area. Divers were deployed, but once again, the search turned up nothing. 8 years after Melissa vanished, her mother remarried and helped raise 4 stepchildren with her new husband. Though she took his last name legally, she continued using her previous surname in public, just in case Melissa was still alive and searching for her. As for Hughes, his story didn't end with the conviction. On August 2nd, 2019, he was released early for good behavior after serving just over half of his sentence. He was 53 at the time. He has now been a free man for several years. Melissa Brannon is still listed as missing. Her body has never been found, and without proof of death, no murder charge was ever filed. But after all this time, few hold out hope that she's still alive. If you made it this far, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave your theories below. What do you think happened to Melissa Brannon? Case 2. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin. Christine Jessup was born on November 29, 1974, in the small town of Queensville, Ontario. Nestled near a scenic lake, Queensville was quiet, peaceful, and home to just 600 residents. It was the kind of place where people left doors unlocked and everyone knew each other. Christine lived with her parents and older brother, who was 5 years her senior. She was full of energy, loved riding her bike, playing baseball, and spending time outdoors with friends. Animals fascinated her. Once, when a bat flew into her room, she surprised her family by wanting to keep it as a pet instead of running away. On the morning of October 3, 1984, Christine, just 9 years old, woke up and got ready for school like any other day. Her brother had a bad toothache, so their mother planned to take him to the dentist in Toronto. That meant Christine would be home alone after school until they returned. It wasn't unusual. Despite her age, she had stayed home unsupervised before. Her parents trusted her. She was responsible, independent, and knew how to take care of herself. Before leaving school that day, Christine told her best friend they'd meet up later in the park near her house. She then boarded the school bus, which dropped her off just a few hundred yards from home. A short while later, her friend showed up at the park and waited. And waited. But Christine never arrived. After a while, her friend went home and tried calling. No one answered. When Christine's mother and brother returned home later that day, they expected to find her there. But the house was quiet. Something wasn't right. Christine's backpack was in her room, and the mail had been brought in from the mailbox. Clear signs that she had made it home after school, but she was nowhere to be seen. Then came the unsettling details. Her bike was lying outside, the kickstand broken. Christine loved that bike and always took care of it. She never left it out like that. Even more puzzling was her jacket, hanging on a high wall hook that Christine couldn't reach on her own. Still, her mother didn't panic. She assumed Christine had simply gone out to play, like she often did, and waited for her to return. But as the sun dipped lower and darkness began to settle over Queensville, worry set in. Christine was independent, yes, but she always told someone where she was going. Her mother began calling the parents of Christine's friends, hoping she had gone to one of their homes. One by one, the calls came up empty. No one had seen Christine since school. Then her best friend answered. They had planned to meet in the park, she said, but Christine never showed. Now, fully alarmed, Christine's mother and brother took to the streets. In a town as small as Queensville, it didn't take long to check all of Christine's usual spots, but she wasn't in any of them. By 7 p.m., with no sign of her daughter and nowhere else to turn, Christine's mother called the police. For the local police in Queensville, Missing child reports weren't unheard of. Usually, it was nothing more than a child losing track of time or running off after a minor argument with a parent. These cases were often resolved quickly. No major investigation needed. At first, Christine Jessup's case looked the same. Police organized a basic search and called on the community for help. Dozens of residents responded immediately, fanning out across the small town in hopes of finding the 9-year-old girl. Soon after, investigators learned Christine had stopped at a small store located between her house and the park where she was supposed to meet her friend. She bought a pack of gum. After that, her trail vanished. With no surveillance footage to rely on, this was 1984. Police could only guess at the timeline. They believed she visited the store just minutes after getting off the school bus. The search continued late into the night, but there was no sign of Christine. By morning, the effort grew. More residents joined the search. More leads came in. Police received several tips, sightings of a young girl walking alone or riding in a passing car, but none could be confirmed. The descriptions were vague, the timelines unclear, and none of the witnesses could say with certainty that it was Christine they had seen. As the hours turned into days, the tone of the investigation shifted. Officers began to consider a grim possibility: abduction. In a town as small as Queensville, it was unlikely that a child could vanish without someone noticing. Christine's mother was adamant. Her daughter would never run away. She knew Christine, and this wasn't like her. Still, despite their growing suspicions and expanding search, police had no answers. Christine Jessup was gone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. When police searched Christine Jessup's home, their lack of experience showed. The search was far from thorough. Officers sifted through some of her belongings but failed to dust for fingerprints. Worse, they allowed neighbors and family friends to come and go freely before a proper forensic examination could be done, potentially contaminating critical evidence. At the time of Christine's disappearance, her father was in jail. Just weeks earlier, he had received a short sentence for a minor fraud charge. On the day Christine vanished, her mother and brother had visited him after the dentist appointment. Once authorities suspected an abduction, Christine's father was released to be with his family. He joined the search for his daughter immediately. The investigation stretched on for weeks, but nothing surfaced. No clues, no sightings, no leads. Police expanded their efforts to the surrounding forests and fields, hoping for anything that might point to where Christine had gone. But there was nothing. Then came December 31st. While most families prepared to ring in the new year, the Jessups had nothing to celebrate. They clung to what little hope they had left, but it was slipping away. That day, 35 miles from Queensville in the town of Sunderland, a local man went out searching for his missing dog. He wandered into a wooded area behind his home and spotted what looked like a pile of discarded trash. When he walked closer, he stopped cold. It wasn't trash. It was a child's body. Shaken, he raced home and called the police. When officers arrived at the wooded area in Sunderland, they quickly confirmed the worst. Though the body was badly decomposed, a small clue left no doubt about the victim's identity. Next to the remains lay a recorder, with a piece of paper taped to it bearing the name Christine Jessup. It was the same recorder Christine had been given at school on the day she disappeared. Foul play was immediately suspected. Part of Christine's clothing, her pants and underwear, had been removed and lay beside the body, while the rest of her clothes remained on. The remains were transported to the medical examiner, and Queensville police officially reclassified the case as a homicide. The autopsy revealed multiple stab wounds, which were determined to be the cause of death. Christine also had numerous abrasions consistent with an assault. Forensic experts discovered foreign biological material on her underwear, indicating she had likely been sexually assaulted. But in 1984, DNA analysis was still years away. The evidence couldn't point to a suspect, at least not yet. Investigators believed Christine had been murdered elsewhere, then transported to the remote location where she was found. It didn't make sense that the killer would drive 35 miles to dispose of the body when there were so many secluded areas closer to Queensville. That detail raised a new theory. Detectives suspected the killer had some connection to Sunderland. Familiarity with the area might have made it feel like a safer place to hide the crime. But they were also nearly certain the perpetrator lived in Queensville and knew Christine personally. There were no signs of a struggle at her home, and it appeared she may have willingly gone with someone she trusted. Throughout the investigation, detectives repeatedly asked Christine's parents if anyone stood out, anyone who might have had a reason to harm their daughter. But her mother always gave the same answer: no one came to mind. Police had already interviewed nearly every resident of Queensville. They followed dozens of leads, looked into individuals with criminal records, and chased tips from across the region. But none of it led anywhere. Then, on February 14th, investigators returned to speak with Christine's mother once more. They asked again if anyone had ever seemed suspicious. This time she hesitated, then mentioned something she had previously overlooked. The Moran family lived right next door. They were well known and respected in town. The father owned a small business and had a reputation for being able to fix almost anything. Locals often turned to him for help, and the family was well liked. He had 6 adult children, most of whom helped run the family business. One of them, 25-year-old Guy Paul Moran, lived at home with his parents. Christine's mother recalled a few things that seemed off. Unlike the rest of the town, Guy Paul had never joined the search for Christine. And when her body was found, he didn't attend the funeral, even though the Jessops were his closest neighbors. That stood out. She described Guy Paul as quiet and withdrawn. He had a few friends and a girlfriend, but he mostly kept to himself. Unlike his outgoing family, he was solitary and deeply passionate about music, especially the clarinet. That detail caught investigators' attention. Christine had her recorder with her when she disappeared. Could Moran have used music to start a conversation, to lure her away? It wasn't hard to imagine. Christine would have known him. He'd lived just a few yards away her entire life. Detectives paid a visit to Guy Paul Moran and asked how well he knew Christine Jessop. He said they had barely spoken, only recalling a single encounter when he helped her catch her runaway dog. When asked where he was on the day Christine disappeared, Moran explained that he had been at work about 30 miles away until around 3:30 p.m. After that, he said, he stopped at a store, fueled up at a gas station, and got home by 5 p.m. Then came a strange moment. When asked what he thought of Christine, Moran said she was a typical sweet kid, but then added something that stopped the detectives cold. But sometimes they grow up to be corrupt. The comment was unsettling. Investigators took a closer look at his alibi. They reviewed his work records and confirmed he clocked out at exactly 3:32 p.m. Even if he had driven straight to Queensville, he wouldn't have arrived before Christine's mother returned home. Records also backed up his story. He had made stops at both a grocery store and a gas station, which took about 30 minutes. His family told police he got home around 5 p.m., and went to bed early, exhausted from the day. Everything checked out. On paper, it seemed clear. He didn't have time to abduct Christine. Still, detectives weren't fully convinced. What if his family had gotten the timing wrong? Or worse, were covering for him? Detectives asked to search Guy Paul Morin's car. Inside the trunk, they found several fabric fibers, which were sent to the lab for analysis. Experts soon concluded that the fibers matched the sweater Christine had been wearing when she disappeared. They also compared several hairs found on Christine's body to Morin's. At the time, forensic technology only allowed for visual comparisons, focusing on color and texture. Far from definitive, but enough to raise suspicion. Looking to strengthen their case, investigators consulted an FBI profiler. Based on the available details, the profiler outlined a rough psychological portrait. A male suspect from Queensville, aged 19 to 26, possibly with a criminal history involving voyeurism or arson. While the profile included a range of traits, detectives focused only on those that aligned with Morin. In reality, Morin had no criminal record, no known behavioral issues, and matched fewer than half the traits described. But detectives had already made up their minds. On April 22nd, they arrested him. Morin denied any involvement. He was booked and held in jail while awaiting trial. The news stunned Christine's family. The idea that their quiet neighbor could be involved in such a brutal crime was difficult to process. Still, one detail continued to trouble the lead detective. Christine's mother was confident she had returned home at exactly 4:10 p.m. She'd looked at the kitchen clock the moment she walked in. Based on Morin's timeline, it would have been nearly impossible for him to leave work, make his stops, and arrive before then. He would have needed at least another 15 to 20 minutes. Investigators kept pushing. They urged Christine's mother to reconsider her memory. Was it possible she got home later than she thought? Again and again, they insisted that Morin was guilty, and that her timeline was the only thing standing in the way of justice. Eventually, under pressure, she admitted she might have arrived a little later than she remembered. For detectives, that was enough. At trial, prosecutors painted Guy Paul Morin as a socially awkward loner, someone who didn't quite fit in and made others uncomfortable. They argued that he had enough time to abduct Christine Jessup, suggesting her mother's initial timeline was flawed. As for the alibi provided by Morin's family, the prosecution brought in a psychologist who claimed they showed signs of deception, implying they might be covering for him. One of the most dramatic moments came from an undercover officer who had been planted in Morin's jail cell. He claimed Morin spoke about the cause of death and other details of the crime, but all of the information had already been reported in the media. Morin hadn't revealed anything that wasn't public knowledge. The officer also testified that Morin talked about The Shining being his favorite movie and even quoted lines from it in casual conversation. While Morin maintained his innocence throughout the trial, the officer's testimony had a powerful effect. Coupled with the prosecution's portrayal of Morin as a disturbed outsider, it cast a dark shadow over his character and swayed public perception. Yet when it came to the evidence, the case was weak. Much of it was circumstantial or questionable. In the end, the jury wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. Morin was found not guilty and walked free. But the case was far from over. Prosecutors immediately announced their intent to appeal, maintaining that they still believed Guy Paul Morin was guilty. The not guilty verdict devastated Christine Jessup's family. For them, Guy Paul Morin was still the man responsible for their daughter's murder. Now, they had to face the unbearable reality of living just yards away from him once again. Her father later said they had been living in hell since Christine's death, and now that hell would continue. Many in Queensville shared the sentiment. Despite the verdict, suspicion lingered. Residents didn't want Moran back. When he returned home, his family's mailbox was stuffed with threatening letters. Objects were thrown at their house. The town turned hostile. Meanwhile, the prosecution moved forward with an appeal. Their argument centered on a technicality. They claimed the trial judge had failed to properly explain the concept of reasonable doubt to the jury. That was enough for a higher court to grant a retrial. The second trial was scheduled for 1991, several years after Christine's murder. As preparations began, troubling revelations surfaced. The fiber expert who had originally linked fibers from Moran's car to Christine's sweater had worn a similar sweater during the comparison, a major breach of protocol. Even worse, by the time of the retrial, many of the original forensic samples were missing. The fabric fibers, several hairs found on the body or clothing, gone. And that wasn't all. Some of Christine's bones and even a cigarette butt found near her body were no longer part of the evidence. The cigarette had never been entered into the case file, possibly because Moran was a non-smoker. Despite these alarming lapses, the second trial was set to begin. At the second trial, the prosecution presented a new theory. They claimed that when Christine returned from school, Moran saw her holding the recorder. He then took out his clarinet and began playing, drawing Christine toward him. Once she was close, they alleged, he forced her into his car, drove to an unknown location, and murdered her. Even prosecutors admitted the theory was thin. Still, in July 1992, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty of murder. Guy Paul Moran was sentenced to life in prison. But this time, the public wasn't convinced. Initially, the media had painted Moran as a reclusive oddball, someone capable of a horrific crime. But as details emerged about the investigation's many missteps, missing evidence, flawed forensics, and procedural failures, the tone changed. The narrative shifted from guilt to possible injustice. A growing number of concerned citizens rallied around Moran's case. Amid mounting pressure, his attorney filed an appeal. In a rare move, the court granted bail, allowing Moran to be released from prison while awaiting a new trial. It wasn't easy. Bail was set at nearly $500,000. Desperate to help their son, Moran's parents mortgaged their home to secure his release. His lawyer then made a bold request: DNA testing on the biological material found on Christine's underwear. Earlier attempts to analyze it had failed. Technology simply wasn't advanced enough. But by the mid-1990s, forensic science had caught up. Experts were now able to extract a DNA profile from the semen left behind on the fabric. The DNA results were conclusive. The biological evidence found on Christine Jessup's underwear did not belong to Guy Paul Moran. The revelation sent shockwaves across Canada. Moran had spent over a year and a half behind bars and endured nearly a decade of legal battles. His life had been torn apart, based not on truth, but on tunnel vision by investigators who had built a case around him instead of following the evidence. In January 1995, 10 years after Christine's body was found, all charges against Moran were dropped. He was officially exonerated. Later, Moran sued the authorities and was awarded $1.2 million in compensation. Several investigators involved in the case faced serious consequences. Some lost their jobs. Others were held legally accountable for fabricating or mishandling evidence. The case became a national scandal and a turning point for the Canadian justice system. It led to sweeping reforms aimed at preventing wrongful convictions and improving forensic protocols. Following Morin's release, authorities reopened the Christine Jessup case. A new team of detectives took over the investigation, this time with a crucial piece of evidence: the real killer's DNA profile. Police began collecting samples from hundreds of potential suspects. None matched. As time passed, the case was handed off to the cold case unit. Despite fresh reviews and continued efforts, no new leads emerged. The damage had already been done. The original investigation had not only lost key evidence, it had also ignored other possible suspects entirely. Investigators were so convinced of Morin's guilt, they failed to look anywhere else. And the real killer slipped away. Years after Guy Paul Morin's exoneration, Canadian media continued to follow the case. One major news article sparked a flurry of tips. A man came forward claiming his father had confessed to Christine Jessup's murder on his deathbed. Others pointed to men with questionable reputations who had lived in Queensville at the time of the crime. Journalists handed all the information to police, but none of the leads resulted in a definitive suspect. Then, in 2019, 35 years after Christine's murder, the case was reopened once again. A new detective was assigned. Armed with only the killer's DNA profile, he turned to a cutting-edge method: genetic genealogy. The technique was still relatively new, and no lab in Canada had the tools to conduct such advanced work. The detective sought approval from his superiors to work with a specialized lab in the United States and secured funding to move forward. The lab's goal: identify the killer's relatives through public DNA databases. Soon, they had a breakthrough. Several distant relatives of the unknown suspect were identified, but building full family trees from these fragments would take years, unless they found a shortcut. So the experts cross-referenced details from the genetic profiles, narrowing the scope. Eventually, they estimated that police would need to investigate the family trees of about 400 individuals to trace the suspect. With this mountain of data, the detective turned to a trusted colleague in Canada, an expert in complex DNA genealogy. He agreed to help. Together, they began reconstructing family trees, piece by piece, in a renewed search for Christine's killer. To avoid any risk of bias or misdirection, the DNA specialist chose not to share his findings with the lead detective during the initial stages. He and his team quietly spent 8 months piecing together family trees, carefully analyzing hundreds of names. Eventually, they zeroed in on a single lineage. The tree traced back to a man born in 1804, and after meticulously working through generations of descendants, they narrowed their focus to one family. By October 2020, they had a name: Calvin Hoover. When the team finally passed the information to the detective, the name meant nothing to him. Hoover had never appeared in the case files, not in any reports, leads, or interviews across more than 3 decades. Then came the twist. As the detective dug deeper, he discovered something that stunned him. Calvin Hoover had been one of Christine Jessup's parents' closest friends at the time of her disappearance. In 1984, Hoover was 28 years old and lived in Queensville with his wife and children. His family and the Jessups had been close for years. He was even listed as an emergency contact for Christine. Just days before Christine vanished, her mother had stopped by the Hoover home. During the visit, she told Hoover's wife that she'd be taking her son to a dental appointment in Toronto and then visiting her husband in jail. But Christine would be staying home alone. That conversation changed everything. Hoover's wife clearly knew Christine would be alone that day, and so did Hoover. Christine Jessup knew Calvin Hoover well. He was a trusted family friend, and she would have had no reason to fear him. If he offered her a ride or asked her to come with him, she likely would have said yes without hesitation. The detective was now left with one troubling question. Why had Hoover's name never appeared in the case files? If he was that close to the family, surely someone had spoken to him. Digging deeper, the detective made a disturbing discovery. Shortly after Christine's body was found, police had spoken to Hoover's wife. She told them she hadn't been home at the time of Christine's disappearance, but added that her husband had been home, watching their children. That was it. No follow-up. No direct questioning of Hoover himself. Investigators at the time had simply accepted his wife's word as an alibi and moved on. Hoover had the opportunity to commit the crime, and no one had ever looked his way. Now, the detective needed one final confirmation: Hoover's DNA. But there was a problem. Hoover had died in 2015 after battling serious health issues. Exhumation was an option, but after 5 years, biological material might no longer be viable. Then came a break. The detective contacted the medical experts who had handled Hoover's autopsy. They still had 2 preserved vials of his blood. The samples were rushed to the lab. Technicians extracted a DNA profile, and when compared to the killer's DNA, it was a perfect match. Calvin Hoover had murdered Christine Jessup. When Christine's parents were told the truth, they were stunned. For decades, they had lived next to the man who took their daughter's life, someone they trusted. They were heartbroken he had never been held accountable. Hoover's own family was also shocked. His wife said she had never, even for a moment, suspected him of any involvement. As for Guy Paul Morin, the news brought no relief. He told reporters that learning the identity of the real killer changed nothing. He had spent nearly a decade bouncing between prison and courtrooms. Even after his exoneration, many people still believed he was guilty. He said he lived in constant fear during those years, a fear that never fully left him. In his words, "This case didn't just take Christine's life, it took mine too." Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Case 3, the babysitter murder. Karen Slattery case. Karen Slattery was born on September 18, 1969, in New York. She was the second child in a devout Catholic family, with a loving mother, father, and an older brother. When Karen was just a year old, the family made a fresh start in Florida, eventually settling in the quiet coastal town of Bonn Beach. As she grew, Karen thrived. She attended the local Catholic school and threw herself into sports and extracurriculars: softball, swimming, gymnastics. Living near the ocean, she and her friends spent countless days on the beach, soaking in the sun and enjoying the waves. A few years after the move, Karen's younger sister was born, and the two quickly formed a deep bond. The little girl adored Karen, copied her, followed her everywhere, and saw her not just as a sister, but as a role model. At 14, Karen started high school and joined a babysitting program offered through the school. It was a simple idea. Parents in need of childcare could contact the school, which would send a student trained through the program. For Karen, it was a perfect fit. She loved kids, had years of experience caring for her little sister, and now had a chance to earn her own money. She signed up without hesitation. Her kindness, maturity, and natural connection with children quickly made her a favorite among local families. Jobs came easily, and she was always in demand. At the same time, she was excelling in swimming, with her sights set on a college scholarship. By all accounts, Karen Slattery was full of promise, but her bright future would soon be stolen in the most tragic way. On the evening of March 24th, 1984, 14-year-old Karen Slattery was scheduled to babysit for a local family she knew well. She had watched their two young daughters many times before. At first, Karen considered turning the job down. She wanted to spend that weekend with friends, but ultimately decided to accept. One of her close friends had recently moved out of state, and Karen was hoping to visit her during the upcoming school break. She needed the money to help pay for the plane ticket. That night, Karen's mother drove her to the family's home. The parents greeted her warmly, reminded her to keep the doors locked, and left for the evening. For several hours, everything was normal. Karen and the two girls played games, watched cartoons, had dinner. Around 9:30 p.m., she put the girls to bed, then returned to the living room and called her best friend. They talked excitedly about the next day. Her friend's dad had gotten them tickets to a baseball game, and they couldn't wait. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. After that call, Karen phoned another friend who was also babysitting that night. They laughed, swapped stories, and Karen mentioned she was heading to the kitchen to grab something to eat. She said she'd call back in a few minutes. She never did. Her friend assumed Karen had just fallen asleep. Around midnight, the girls' parents returned home. Immediately, something felt wrong. The porch light, which they always left on, was off. Inside, the house was dark. The TV had been turned off, and there was no sign of Karen. As the parents approached the house, they noticed something strange. The front door was unlocked. Karen had been reminded to lock it. Thinking she may have forgotten, they stepped inside and called her name. No response. They began switching on lights. When they reached the kitchen, they froze in horror. A large pool of blood covered the floor. The wall-mounted phone was swinging by its cord. A trail of blood led from the kitchen down the hallway, straight toward the bedrooms where their daughters were sleeping. Both bedroom doors were closed. A faint light glowed beneath one of them. Panicked, the father told his wife to run to the neighbors and call the police. He stayed behind, paralyzed with fear. His daughters were just behind that door, but the possibility of what he might find kept him from opening it. Within minutes, a patrol officer arrived. He told the father to wait outside, then carefully entered the house. He followed the trail to the girls' room, opened the door, and found both children asleep in bed, unharmed. He gently carried them outside to their parents, who were overcome with relief. But that relief didn't last. They quickly told the officer there was still one more girl in the house, Karen. The officer went back in, following the blood trail to the master bedroom. He pushed open the door. Lying on the floor was a young girl's body. He checked for a pulse. There was none. As the officer stood in the master bedroom, additional police units and paramedics arrived on scene. The victim was soon identified as 14-year-old Karen Slattery. Her clothes were partially missing. A towel had been placed over her face, and her body showed multiple stab wounds. The evidence suggested she had suffered a violent attack. After her body was removed for forensic examination, investigators began combing through the house for clues. In the living room, they found an open window with a cut screen, likely the point of entry. Outside, they discovered boot prints and trampled vegetation beneath several windows, indicating someone may have been watching the home before breaking in. But there was something even more unusual. Alongside the boot prints were barefoot tracks, both in the yard and inside the house. suggesting the intruder had removed their footwear before entering. When detectives spoke with the homeowners, they learned that Karen had always been careful to lock the doors while babysitting. Since the front door was found unlocked, it appeared the killer had used it to exit the home after the crime. Regarding the open window, the couple explained that they had left it slightly open before leaving that evening. It had been a cool, breezy night. Realizing this may have given the perpetrator easy access, they were devastated and overwhelmed with guilt. Police also found bicycle tracks in the yard. The trail led toward the coastal road but ended there, suggesting the intruder had arrived and escaped by bike, vanishing into the night. Forensic investigators attempted to cast the barefoot prints found at the scene, but the impressions were too smeared to yield usable results. More puzzling, there were no foreign fingerprints anywhere in the house, not even in the bathroom, where evidence suggested the perpetrator had taken a shower. Detectives believed the attack began in the kitchen, near the wall phone where Karen had made her last call. A bloodied hammer was found nearby, possibly the initial weapon used. No knife matching the wounds was located in the house, leading investigators to conclude the killer had brought it with him and taken it when he fled. The hammer had come from a cabinet inside the home. The killer had apparently searched for it before the attack. From the same cabinet, he also took a pair of women's gloves, items that were missing and believed to have been taken with him during his escape. Nothing else appeared to be stolen. Valuables were untouched, casting doubt on robbery as a motive. An autopsy later revealed that Karen had suffered 18 stab wounds, which were ruled the cause of death. Medical examiners also confirmed that she had been assaulted, and biological evidence was recovered. But in 1984, DNA testing was still in its early stages and could not yet be used to identify a suspect. One final detail stood out. A piece of chewing gum was found stuck to the victim's shorts. Karen had only recently had her braces removed and had been excited to chew gum again. The discovery raised questions. Had she dropped it? Or had the killer placed it there for reasons unknown? The mystery only deepened. With no solid leads, investigators turned to the public for help. They asked residents to report any suspicious men seen riding bicycles or acting strangely in the area. Police also began reviewing the records of individuals with prior offenses for burglary or breaking and entering, hoping to find a possible connection. Karen Slattery's murder shook the quiet town to its core. Fear spread quickly. Parents no longer allowed their children to go anywhere alone. What had once been a trusting, close-knit community now lived under a cloud of dread. The high school's babysitting program underwent immediate changes. The once normal practice of sending teen babysitters to clients' homes was now viewed as too dangerous. New guidelines were introduced. Babysitters were told to double-check all windows and doors, remain alert at all times, and, if possible, work in pairs. Some families were even encouraged to drop off their children at the sitter's home and pick them up afterward. Meanwhile, the local police department threw everything it had at the case. Under pressure from a terrified community, investigators worked around the clock to catch the person responsible. They spoke with the two girls Karen had been babysitting, hoping for any clue. One of the children recalled waking up during the night and seeing a man with blood on his face, but she couldn't remember anything else. As the investigation stalled, suspicion briefly shifted toward the parents. There was no clear motive, but some questioned their decision to leave their daughter's home that night. The suspicion intensified when just 2 days after the murder, the family abruptly moved out of state. To many, it seemed like they were running from something. Not long after the initial investigation stalled, a new lead emerged, by accident. An officer working on an unrelated burglary case involving a mobile home tracked down a suspect who had been getting around on a bicycle. That alone wouldn't have raised concern, except the detective noticed two curious details: what appeared to be blood on the bike's handlebars and a piece of chewing gum lodged in the spokes. The gum was the same color as the one found on Karen Slattery's shorts. The bicycle was sent to the lab for testing. Investigators began to consider whether Karen's murder could have been a burglary gone wrong, but the results told a different story. The gum turned out to be a different flavor, and the suspected blood was nothing more than chipped red paint. The trail went cold again. Meanwhile, Karen's friends and family launched a reward fund in hopes of generating new leads. What began as $10,000 quickly grew to $30,000, then $50,000, as the community rallied behind the effort. People were desperate for answers, not just for Karen's family, but for their own peace of mind. The increased reward led to a flood of calls. Thousands of tips poured into the police department. Officers did their best to follow up on everyone. A significant number of callers continued to push the theory that the family Karen had been babysitting for might be involved. The speculation became so widespread that investigators were forced to make a public statement. The parents were not considered suspects, and their alibi had been fully verified. Still, the real killer remained unknown. Not long after the investigation stalled, a woman living just a few blocks from the crime scene contacted police with a strange report. She had come home to find drops of blood on the floor and a note addressed to her nephew. Detectives tracked down the nephew, who confirmed her story. The note, he explained, had been written by a 22-year-old friend with a criminal history. That friend had left the state the day after Karen Slattery's murder. Police located the man in Ohio. He admitted to writing the note and dropping it through the mail slot, but claimed he never saw any blood and firmly denied having anything to do with the crime. He voluntarily gave a DNA sample and agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, several of his answers were flagged as deceptive. Still, he continued to deny any involvement. Without solid evidence, investigators couldn't make an arrest and had to let him go. Around the same time, the county police department acquired a state-of-the-art fingerprint detection device, one that could identify prints with 10 times the sensitivity of previous technology. Detectives working Karen's case requested access and returned to the crime scene. This time, they uncovered dozens of new prints. But after running them through the system, every one of them was matched to family members or known visitors. Weeks passed. Police followed up on thousands of tips and interviewed countless suspects. But none of it brought them any closer to Karen's killer. As the investigation into Karen Slattery's murder dragged on, the situation in the city only grew more challenging. Violent crime had surged to near-record highs. Murders, assaults, and break-ins were on the rise, stretching the police force thin. At one point, authorities even urged parents to fingerprint their children to help identify them in the event of a kidnapping, a request that many families took seriously. For weeks, Karen's case remained cold. Then, everything changed. On May 29th, 2 months after Karen's murder, police were called to the home of 38-year-old Georgiana Warren, just a few miles from Karen's town. What they found was disturbingly familiar. Georgiana's body was discovered in her bed, a pillow covering her face. A hammer lay nearby. The house showed clear signs of a struggle, blood in the bedroom and bathroom, and once again, evidence that the killer had taken a shower. Investigators believed he had entered through a window. The medical examiner confirmed that Georgiana had been assaulted. biological material was recovered. Detectives were immediately struck by the similarities between this case and Karen's. The methods, the details, it was nearly identical. Just like before, 2 children were present in the home, Georgiana's daughters, but they were left unharmed and claimed to have heard nothing. Everyone, from the investigators to the community, believed the same person was responsible for both killings. But just like before, no fingerprints were found. With no solid leads, investigators turned their attention to a book found next to Georgiana Warren's bed. Hoping the killer might have touched it during the attack, they decided to examine every page using the department's new fingerprint detection device. The effort paid off. On page 43, they found a foreign fingerprint, one that didn't belong to anyone in the household. It could very well belong to the killer. In 1984, there were no digital fingerprint databases, so detectives had to manually compare the print to those of known suspects, hoping for a match. Meanwhile, they discovered a possible link between Georgiana and Karen. One of Karen Slattery's friends had recently babysat for Georgiana's children, just days before the murder. Detective Kevin McCoy began to wonder if the person responsible for these murders might also be connected to other unsolved attacks in the area. The killer's ability to avoid leaving fingerprints, evade witnesses, and slip away undetected suggested a level of experience, and perhaps a longer criminal history. Then McCoy remembered another case, one he had investigated a month before Karen's murder. In Boca Raton, a man had broken into a woman's home, entered her bedroom, and struck her repeatedly with a heavy object. He removed her clothing and took her ring, but then left without completing the crime. The woman survived, but the attack left her with severe brain damage. McCoy had always found the case unsettling. Now, he believed it could be connected. But there was a problem. The victim was unable to recall anything about her attacker. As Detective Kevin McCoy continued connecting the dots, he uncovered another disturbing case. On May 22nd, just 2 months after Karen Slattery's murder, a woman returned home with her son around 2 a.m. To their shock, they saw a man removing the security screen from their window, clearly trying to break in. The son gave chase as the man jumped on a bicycle and tried to escape. The suspect briefly got away, but the son caught up and tackled him. A struggle followed, but the man managed to break free, leapt into a nearby canal, and vanished into the darkness. In his rush to flee, the man left behind his bicycle and his sneakers, which were found beneath the window. It appeared he had removed them just before the homeowners arrived. 2 days later, another woman in the same town was jolted awake by a heavy blow to the head. She screamed, and the intruder fled before she could get a clear look. That same evening, a man burst into a woman's bedroom and threatened her. But when she screamed, he turned and ran. 4 days after that, a third woman had a similar encounter. A man broke into her home, frightened her, and fled, tripping and falling into her swimming pool on the way out. To McCoy, the pattern was becoming undeniable. He soon shifted his attention to a series of incidents reported by female students at a nearby university. Over several months, a man had been seen exposing himself and breaking into dormitories. The victims all gave similar descriptions. A white male, average height, short dark hair. Police compiled the details and produced a composite sketch. The suspect was no longer just a shadow in the dark. With the composite sketch in hand, Detective Kevin McCoy turned to a thick binder of mugshots, each belonging to individuals previously charged with sex-related offenses. He flipped through the pages methodically until one face stopped him cold. It was nearly identical to the sketch. McCoy pulled the photo, shuffled it in with several others, and showed the group to one of the university students who had seen the suspect. She didn't hesitate. She pointed directly to him. The man was 23-year-old Dwayne Owen, a repeat offender with a criminal record that included theft, public indecency, and other charges. It was enough for a warrant. But McCoy faced one major problem. No one knew where Owen was. He issued a citywide alert and distributed Owen's photo to every patrol officer. It didn't take long. A few days later, a female officer on routine patrol spotted a man who bore a strong resemblance to the wanted suspect. She approached him and asked for ID. He handed her a military ID under the name Dan Brown. The officer was suspicious. The man looked too much like Dwayne Owen. She detained him and brought him in for questioning. Fingerprint analysis confirmed it. It was him. Owen was immediately charged with possession of a false ID, giving authorities the leverage they needed to hold him in custody while they worked to build the larger case, one that now included multiple home invasions, assaults, and possibly 2 murders. During questioning, Dwayne Owen admitted that the bicycle and sneakers left behind at the attempted break-in belonged to him. He also confessed to several burglaries in the area. But when it came to the murders, he denied any involvement. At the time, DNA technology wasn't advanced enough to link him to the biological evidence recovered from the scenes. So detectives pressed on, relying on interrogation. Owen didn't make it easy. He seemed to enjoy the process, answering in riddles, reciting poetry, and playing games with investigators. When asked directly if he had ever killed someone, he replied simply, "Yes." But he offered no further explanation. When they asked how many, he went silent. Then, slowly, he drew the number 2 on the table with his finger. He boasted about his knowledge of criminology and claimed he could commit crimes without getting caught. But he had missed one detail. While he talked, analysts had been comparing his fingerprints to the one recovered from page 43 of Georgiana Warren's bedside book. It was a match. When detectives returned to the room and told him his print had been found at the scene, Owen smiled and said, "I must have touched that stupid book lying on the bed." Then, almost casually, he began to talk. And soon, he confessed, laying out every detail of the murder. Dwayne Owen gave a chilling account of Georgiana Warren's murder. He described wandering the streets, looking for a house with a potential victim, breaking in, and carrying out the attack. He recalled the details clearly, every step of the night. One of the most disturbing details, Owen had brought a clean change of clothes and left them on his bicycle, planning to change after the crime. It was premeditated. Still, Owen denied any involvement in Karen Slattery's murder, and investigators had no physical evidence tying him to the scene. So one detective took a gamble. He had collected Owen's footprints, but the prints at Karen's crime scene were all too smudged to match. Undeterred, the detective pulled a random photo of a bloody footprint from another case, placed it next to Owen's print, and claimed it was a match. To his surprise, the bluff worked. Owen stared at the photos and nodded. "Yeah," he said, "they do look alike." Soon after, he began to confess. He told detectives he had been riding his bicycle around the neighborhood that night. Around 8 p.m., he spotted Karen through a window and decided to kill her. Before acting, he went to a local bar, had a drink, and stayed for a while. Then he returned to the house after dark. Owen said he watched Karen through the window for some time. Then, to avoid leaving fingerprints, he removed his socks and slipped them over his hands. He quietly entered the home, found a closet, and hid inside. There, he discovered a pair of women's gloves and a hammer. Owen told detectives that after some time, he saw Karen walk into the kitchen and pick up the phone. Panicking, he assumed she had seen him and was calling the police. He burst out of the closet, attacked her, and dragged her into the master bedroom. After the assault, Owen took a shower, gathered his bloody clothes, and exited the house. He hid the clothes in nearby bushes. With a smirk, he mocked the investigators, saying they had missed them. "You didn't check all the bushes, did you?" As for the knife, he claimed he rode his bicycle to the ocean and tossed it into the water. He then returned home, where he lived with his brother and another roommate. There, he carried out a calculated move to establish a false alibi. Owen set the kitchen wall clock back by 2 hours, then made loud noises to wake his roommates. When they came out to see what was going on, he casually asked, "What time is it now?" Both men looked at the clock, which now showed the wrong time, just as Owen had planned. With his full confession on record, Dwayne Owen was formally charged with the murders of Karen Slattery and Georgiana Warren. He was placed in custody to await trial. As investigators looked deeper into Owen's past, they uncovered a deeply troubled history. Owen's childhood was marked by instability. Both parents, addicted to drugs and alcohol, died while he was still young. He and his brother were placed in multiple foster homes, moving from one to the next. As an adult, Owen briefly served in the military and later enrolled in college, taking courses in criminal justice. He once hoped to become a police officer, but a minor criminal conviction ended that possibility. Frustrated by his failed ambitions, Dwayne Owen turned to a darker path. After being charged with the murders, he confessed to a string of other crimes: assaults, indecent exposure, voyeurism, and numerous break-ins. Still, he insisted that Karen Slattery and Georgiana Warren were the only two people he had ever killed. While awaiting trial, Owen nearly pulled off a bold escape. He climbed into a prison trash bin, hoping it would be loaded onto a truck and carried out of the facility. Fortunately, guards discovered him before he could get away. The trial for Karen's murder began 1 year later. Owen refused to plead guilty. His attorneys argued that his confession had been coerced and that his rights had been violated. But once jurors heard the full taped confession in court, there was little doubt about his guilt. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 death sentences, one for each murder. On top of that, he received 6 life sentences for his other crimes. Owen was sent to death row, where he has remained ever since. But the story didn't end there. Not long after, Owen filed an appeal in Karen's case. He claimed that his right to remain silent had been violated, pointing to several moments during his interrogation where he said, "I don't want to talk about this," but detectives continued questioning him. To the shock of many, the court accepted his argument. All charges related to Karen Slattery's murder were dropped. The prosecution appealed the decision to drop the charges in Karen Slattery's case. After 7 years of legal battles, a new trial was granted, and once again, the result was the same. Dwayne Owen received a death sentence. Since then, Owen remained on death row. As is often the case with capital punishment, years passed between sentencing and execution. This case was no exception. Owen's execution was finally scheduled for June 15, 2023, nearly 39 years after the murders. Karen's younger sister was there. She had waited decades for this moment and came to witness the death of the man who took her sister's life. She had hoped to look Owen in the eye, but he kept his eyes shut until the very end. Her presence that day carried deeper meaning. After Karen's murder, she suffered from chronic insomnia, sleep rarely came easy. Eventually, she decided that if she couldn't sleep, she might as well use her time to help others. She chose a path of service and justice. She became a sheriff. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Case 4. The Jealous Ex, Lauren Ashley Case. Lauren Ashley was born on April 1st, 1993, in the quiet town of Warren, Massachusetts. An only child, she grew up surrounded by love and support. When she was 6, her parents divorced. But even after the separation, her father remained a constant presence in her life. The two were especially close. At one point, they even traveled together to New Orleans to help with Hurricane Katrina relief efforts. Despite her young age, Lauren joined her father in the cleanup, determined to make a difference. From a young age, Lauren was drawn to sports. She started with soccer, but eventually found her passion in tennis, where she began to see real success. Still, her deepest love was music. She joined the school's music group and regularly performed at local events. During high school, she took on a part-time job at a clothing store in the local mall. She had plans. After graduation, she intended to attend college in North Carolina and was saving money to prepare for the move. Lauren graduated in the summer of 2011 at 18 years old. Knowing her time at home was limited, she spent those final months making memories with friends and family. She was ready to start the next chapter of her life, but that future would never come. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. On the morning of July 3rd, Lauren Ashley headed off to her shift at the mall like any other day. Before work, she had made plans to meet up with friends later that evening. They expected her to call around 6:30 p.m. She finished her shift, said goodbye to her co-workers, and walked out of the mall. But that call never came. Her friends waited, thinking she was running late. Then they started texting her, calling her, but there was no reply. At first, they figured she was tied up with something and would get back to them soon. But Lauren's father was also growing concerned. She had told him she'd stop by after work, but she never showed. His calls went unanswered too. When he reached out to her friends and realized none of them had heard from her all evening, he didn't wait. He went straight to the police. Warren was a small, quiet town. Lauren's sudden silence made no sense to those who knew her. She had vanished without a word, and no one could think of anywhere she might have gone. The local police quickly launched a search. Not long after, one of Lauren's friends reported spotting her red Jeep parked near a beach by the lake. Officers rushed to the scene. The vehicle was there, but Lauren was not. Inside the car, they found her purse, cell phone, and laptop. The windows were rolled down. The keys were gone, but Lauren had disappeared. The discovery of Lauren Ashley's Jeep raised immediate alarm. Her purse, phone, and laptop were all inside. The windows were down, and Lauren was nowhere to be found. Her friends and family were certain she would never leave her car like that. Her father, panicked, rushed toward the beach and waded into the lake, desperate to find any trace of her. Police searched the vehicle but found no signs of a struggle. No blood, no evidence, no clear indication of what had happened. Officers began canvassing the area around the beach. The only clue they uncovered was Lauren's car keys, found tossed in a nearby storm drain, as if someone had deliberately tried to hide them. As word spread, Lauren's friends began gathering near the beach. Detectives interviewed them, hoping for any lead. That's when they learned about Nathaniel, Lauren's ex-boyfriend. The two had broken up a few months earlier, The friends admitted the split had been hard on him. Concerned, detectives paid Nathaniel a visit that night. He told them he had been home the entire evening. His mother confirmed his story, saying they had watched movies together. For the time being, police ruled him out and turned their attention back to the beach. Lauren's family, neighbors, and dozens of residents joined in the search, combing every inch of the surrounding area. Her friends refused to leave. They stayed beside her car all night, hoping she'd come walking out of the woods, hoping for a miracle. That night, investigators took a closer look at Lauren's phone and discovered something that changed the tone of the case. At exactly 7:05 p.m., Lauren had sent a single-word text to her ex-boyfriend Nathaniel. Here. Just 14 minutes earlier, she had called him. The two had spoken for a few minutes. Detectives immediately returned to Nathaniel for questioning. This time, he admitted that Lauren had come by around 7 p.m., but insisted she never got out of the car. They had a brief conversation about their relationship, and then, he claimed, she drove away. He said he didn't mention this earlier because he thought it was insignificant. Nathaniel remained calm. His demeanor showed no obvious signs of deception. For now, the police moved on, continuing to chase other leads. The search for Lauren pushed through the night, until just after dawn, a chilling call came in. A woman riding her bike along a wooded road near the river had spotted something unusual in a marshy patch of water. She stopped to look and saw a body. Officers responded immediately. When they pulled the body from the water, there was no doubt. It was Lauren Ashley. Wrapped tightly around her neck was a bungee cord, and a deep cut was clearly visible. Medical examiners later confirmed both the wound and strangulation as the cause of death. There were also defensive wounds on Lauren's arms, a sign she fought back. The investigation had just shifted from a missing person to cold-blooded murder. As officers combed the area around the marsh where Lauren's body was found, they made another troubling discovery: a blood-stained towel, partially hidden in the brush. It was immediately collected and sent to the lab for DNA testing. Now facing a murder investigation, detectives refocused their efforts on identifying the killer, and all signs pointed to Nathaniel. Lauren's friends and family began to share more about her relationship with him. The two had started dating 3 years earlier. On the surface, they had seemed like the perfect couple. Nathaniel was from a well-regarded family. He played football, was well-liked, and had no shortage of charm. But beneath that image, trouble had been brewing. Roughly 2 years into the relationship, things began to shift. Nathaniel became possessive and jealous, often trying to dictate who Lauren could spend time with. He also started drinking heavily, and his behavior became more unpredictable. Lauren's friends saw the toll it was taking. They urged her to walk away, and although the couple broke up more than once, they always ended up back together. That changed 3 months before Lauren's death. This time, Lauren ended things for good, and Nathaniel didn't take it well. He begged her to reconsider, showed up uninvited, and flooded her with calls, but Lauren held her ground. The breakup sent Nathaniel into a spiral. He withdrew from everyone, stopped attending football practice, and barely left the house. Detectives now had motive, history, and a timeline that was growing more suspicious by the hour. Despite having earned a coveted sports scholarship, Nathaniel had seemingly lost all interest in his future. He spent his days drinking and smoking at home, sinking deeper into isolation. Concerned, his mother eventually took him to a therapist, who, after several sessions, concluded that Nathaniel was likely suffering from clinical depression. But even as he pulled away from friends and dropped out of his routine, Nathaniel remained fixated on Lauren. One night, Lauren and her friends hosted a graduation party, a celebration filled with classmates, friends, and even parents. Nathaniel arrived drunk. When he saw Lauren talking to other guys, something snapped. He tried to confront her about their relationship, but Lauren shut him down. She was done. Infuriated, Nathaniel stormed off toward the large party tent set up in the yard. In a fit of rage, he punched a support post, nearly causing the entire structure to collapse. Guests rushed to hold it up. Nathaniel was immediately escorted out. Shaken, Lauren broke down in tears and told her mother, "Nathaniel just won't leave me alone." In another troubling encounter, Nathaniel allegedly approached a boy Lauren had been talking to and threatened to kill him. The pattern was clear and escalating. Lauren had tried to set boundaries, but Nathaniel wasn't listening. For detectives, this was now more than just a failed relationship. Nathaniel had a motive, a violent temper, and he was the last known person to see Lauren alive. But there was still one problem: his mother's alibi. As investigators pressed further, a new piece of the puzzle emerged. Security footage from the mall where Lauren worked showed Nathaniel walking through just an hour before her shift ended. He didn't approach her directly, but he was seen visiting a sports nutrition store on the same floor. It was enough to warrant another visit. But when detectives returned to his house, Nathaniel was gone. His parents said he had left earlier that day, and they had no idea where he went. This time, when officers re-questioned his mother, her story changed. She now recalled that she had briefly left the house to run errands, and crucially, during the exact window when Lauren had stopped by. With Nathaniel's alibi now unraveling, the police had what they needed. He was officially the prime suspect. Detectives secured a search warrant and headed straight for the house. In the garage, their eyes immediately locked onto a set of bungee cords, identical to the one found wrapped around Lauren's neck. Then came the breakthrough. Using luminol, forensic techs uncovered a large, scrubbed bloodstain on the garage floor, invisible to the naked eye. More blood traces showed up on the kitchen floor, the door handle, and two separate sinks. Then they opened a sports bag. Inside were muddy, blood-stained sneakers. In Nathaniel's bedroom, a small door led to the attic. There, hidden behind old boxes, officers found another pair of shoes covered in blood, along with wet, filthy clothing. A silent, damning cache of evidence that told the story no one wanted to believe. The items seized from Nathaniel's home were rushed to the lab, and within hours, forensic analysts confirmed the worst. The blood belonged to Lauren. A manhunt began immediately. Just a few hours later, police tracked Nathaniel to his aunt's house. He didn't resist arrest. Calm and emotionless, he was taken into custody. But the interrogation yielded nothing. His parents had already hired an attorney, and Nathaniel refused to speak. He was officially charged with murder, and the case moved to the courts. As detectives prepared for trial, even darker truths came to light. Nathaniel's cousin, who had been with him around the time of his arrest, told investigators about a call she received from him on the night of Lauren's disappearance. He had asked to hang out, saying he needed to clear his head. She was busy that evening, but they met the next day, just as news of Lauren's body was breaking across town. What he said next chilled her to the bone. When she asked if he was involved in the murder, Nathaniel smirked and replied, "They'll never find the murder weapon, if that's what you mean." Then, almost casually, he admitted to driving Lauren's car to the beach, the same place her belongings were found. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was this. Lauren only agreed to meet him that evening because of his mother. Earlier that day, she had shown up at Lauren's workplace, pleading with her to talk to Nathaniel, worried about his state of mind. She had no idea her request would set into motion the final moments of Lauren's life. While Nathaniel remained behind bars without bail, his defense attorney revealed a controversial legal strategy. They would pursue a not guilty verdict, not by denying the crime, but by arguing that Nathaniel had suffered a mental breakdown so severe he could not be held criminally responsible. If the court accepted that argument, Nathaniel wouldn't go to prison, but instead face mandatory psychiatric treatment, potentially followed by release in just a few years. The trial began on February 13, 2013, a year and a half after Lauren's murder. The prosecution laid out a devastating timeline, arguing that not only was Nathaniel fully aware of what he was doing, but that the crime was premeditated and carefully executed. According to the state's case, Nathaniel planned the entire evening. He told Lauren to meet him after her shift, knowing his parents would be out, and specifically instructed her not to park at his house, but on a nearby street. This, prosecutors argued, was to avoid drawing attention from neighbors or family. Once Lauren arrived, he lured her into the garage where he stabbed and strangled her. Then, he drove her Jeep to the lakeside beach, ditched her keys in a storm drain, and walked home. Later that night, Nathaniel loaded Lauren's body into the trunk of his own car, drove out to a swampy marsh, and dumped her remains in the water, hoping the currents would erase the crime. Then he returned home and began cleaning up the blood. One of the most damning moments came from a key witness who saw Nathaniel that same evening. The man recalled seeing him shirtless, blasting music from his car, returning from the direction of the swamp. The timeline was clear, the intent was undeniable, and the jury was watching. Nathaniel's defense team never denied the central fact. He had taken Lauren's life, but in court, they argued the killing was the result of a temporary psychotic break, claiming Nathaniel was in such a dissociative state that he couldn't control his actions. To support this theory, several expert witnesses testified. They noted that Nathaniel had a family history of schizophrenia, a factor that may have predisposed him to mental instability. On top of that, his years of playing football had exposed him to repeated head trauma, and he had long struggled with severe depression. Nathaniel himself told psychologists that during the murder, it felt like he was watching his actions from outside his body, unable to stop himself. But the prosecution pushed back hard. They argued that no psychotic episode could explain the deliberate, calculated series of events that followed Lauren's death. According to the evidence, Nathaniel had lured her to his home, murdered her, disposed of her body, cleaned the crime scene, and hid his clothing. These weren't the impulsive actions of someone in a mental fog. They were the hallmarks of premeditation. The jury agreed. They returned a verdict of guilty, and the judge sentenced Nathaniel to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But what happened next stunned everyone in the courtroom. Lauren's father walked over to Nathaniel's parents and embraced them. Later, he would explain that although they stood on opposite sides of the tragedy, they too had lost a child that day. In the wake of the trial, Lauren's father established a foundation in her name. Its mission, to educate teens about toxic relationships, warning signs of abuse, and the importance of speaking out before it's too late. There was, however, a final twist in the legal story. In 2021, the Supreme Court ruled that individuals under the age of 20 could not be sentenced to life without parole. Nathaniel had been exactly 20 when sentenced, meaning he might someday be eligible for a parole hearing. So far, no motion has been filed. Lauren's family reacted with anguish. Her mother said plainly, "He took our daughter's life. He should never have the chance to live his own freely again." For now, Nathaniel remains behind bars, but the scars he left on Lauren's family and their small Massachusetts town will never fully heal. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. Case 5. The Secret Life of Patrick. Valerie Tyndall Case. Valerie Tyndall was born on August 29, 2005, in Indianapolis, Indiana, into a large and loving family. Her parents, a brother, and 4 sisters. At some point during her childhood, the family decided to leave the city behind and settle in Arlington, a quiet, tight-knit town about an hour outside Indianapolis. With just a few hundred residents, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other and where danger felt like a distant concept. Valerie quickly adapted. She enrolled in the local school, made friends easily, and grew fond of small-town life. As she got older, she began picking up part-time jobs, eager to earn her own money. She started out working in a couple of local restaurants, then eventually joined a lawn care company. That job turned out to be the perfect fit. The hours were flexible enough to balance with school, and the work itself, operating a mower, was straightforward and physically manageable. By 2023, Valerie was 17 and focused on her future. She worked hard in school, hoping to get accepted into a veterinary program. Her love for animals had been a part of her since childhood, and she was determined to turn that passion into a career. That summer, while her peers were enjoying the break, Valerie was researching colleges and pushing through long days of lawn work, quietly saving for the life she had carefully planned. On the morning of June 7th, Valerie told her parents she was heading to work. She said goodbye, just like any other day, and walked out the door. Her mother expected her back within a few hours, but as the day wore on, something didn't feel right. Valerie wasn't answering her phone, and by late afternoon, concern turned into alarm. Her mom called her boss, Patrick, a longtime family friend and neighbor who ran the lawn care business Valerie worked for. What he said chilled her. Patrick told her that Valerie didn't have a shift scheduled that day, and she hadn't shown up at all. That single revelation shifted everything. Her parents tried to stay calm, but their unease deepened. Valerie was responsible, predictable. This wasn't like her. Her mother wondered if, just maybe, Valerie had lied about work to spend time with friends. It was out of character, but at that point, hope was all they had. They called everyone they could think of. Friends, classmates, neighbors, no one had seen her. By the next morning, with no sign of their daughter and her phone still silent, Valerie's parents reported her missing. Police began by speaking with the family and, as is routine in such cases, initially entertained the possibility that Valerie had left home voluntarily. Her mother noted that Wednesdays weren't usually workdays for Valerie, but she had assumed her daughter had picked up an extra shift. That assumption now only added to the mystery. Officers quickly sat down with Valerie's boss, Patrick, who confirmed she hadn't been scheduled to work that day. Her last shift was the Tuesday before her disappearance. Investigators then began working their way through her circle: friends, classmates, neighbors, but no one had seen her. No one had any idea where she might be. In a town as small as Arlington, where everyone knows everyone, the investigation moved swiftly. Officers interviewed anyone who might have crossed paths with Valerie that day, but every lead came up cold, except for one. A witness claimed to have seen Valerie driving shortly after noon on the day she vanished. But that sighting, while credible, did little to move the case forward. It provided a time frame, not a direction. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. As the days slipped by with no word from Valerie, police started to face the grim reality. She likely wasn't coming home on her own. They narrowed the investigation to two primary theories. Either Valerie had run away, or she had been the victim of foul play. Her parents held out hope for the first possibility. The thought of her running away was painful, but it was survivable. They knew it didn't make sense. Valerie was thriving at school, working toward her dream of becoming a veterinarian, and nothing at home suggested she wanted to leave. But clinging to that hope was better than imagining the alternative. In the weeks that followed, law enforcement, family, and volunteers fanned out across Arlington. They searched fields, wooded areas, back roads, everywhere a car might have gone unnoticed. Detectives also urged the public to help them locate Valerie's vehicle. In a town that small, a missing car should have stood out. The fact that no one had seen it only deepened the mystery. Either Valerie had driven it out of town herself, or someone had made it disappear. Nearly 3 weeks after Valerie vanished, a major development surfaced. On June 26th, police located her car, abandoned in the parking lot of an apartment complex in Shelbyville, about 20 miles from Arlington. The license plates had been removed, and the doors were locked. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no personal items, nothing that could offer immediate clues. But investigators quickly noticed something significant. The complex where the car was found happened to be one of the properties serviced by the lawn care company Valerie worked for. That fact made her boss, Patrick, suddenly a lot more interesting. Patrick had previously told police that Valerie hadn't been scheduled to work that day. But now, detectives began to wonder if he was withholding information. They decided to dig deeper. When officers canvassed the neighborhood around the apartment complex, they spoke to a witness who remembered seeing Valerie there on the day she disappeared, and she wasn't alone. According to the witness, her boss Patrick was in the car with her. Detectives went straight back to Patrick. At first, he stuck to his original story. He hadn't seen Valerie that day. But when they confronted him with the witness statement and the discovery of her vehicle, his version of events changed dramatically. He now claimed that he had met Valerie in Shelbyville after she asked him for a ride to Homer, a small nearby town. According to Patrick, she said she planned to run away and someone would be waiting there to pick her up. He agreed to drive her. Once in Homer, Valerie supposedly got out of his car and into another vehicle with an unidentified man. Patrick said he never saw her again. The next day, he picked up Valerie's Jeep and left it at the Shelbyville apartment complex. He told police he was simply trying to help. Detectives quickly spotted cracks in Patrick's version of events. They had already reviewed the location data from Valerie's phone, and the results didn't line up. According to the data, her phone had last been active in Arlington, not in Shelbyville or Homer as Patrick claimed. This strongly suggested that whatever happened to Valerie occurred before she ever left town. When confronted with this contradiction, Patrick changed his story again. Now he claimed that Valerie had met him near the Shelbyville apartment complex, then rode with him to his house. He said he left her there alone while he went to work, and when he returned later that day, she was gone. To the detectives, this version sounded even less believable than the first. They asked Patrick to hand over his phone. He complied, and investigators quickly found something noteworthy: a string of text messages exchanged with Valerie on the day she vanished. At 11:23 a.m., Valerie had texted, "I'll be there soon." Hours later, Patrick replied, "Where are you?" And again, "Where are you?" But Valerie never responded. The texts only deepened the detectives' suspicions, and they began to dig into Patrick's personal connection to Valerie. When they spoke to her parents, her mother shared a troubling observation. Patrick had always seemed unusually close to her daughter. Despite being 59 years old, he often spent time with Valerie outside of work, taking her shopping, giving her gifts, and building what looked more like a relationship than a typical employer-employee bond. It was behavior that had unsettled Valerie's mother for some time. Now, it felt even more ominous. Initially, Valerie's mother hadn't given much weight to her concerns about Patrick. After all, he was a longtime family friend, and Valerie was close with his daughter. She assumed Patrick was simply being kind and supportive. But one incident stood out, and it had always felt a little off. Patrick once invited Valerie to visit an aquarium in another city. Her parents agreed, thinking it was a family outing. Only later did they learn that Patrick had gone alone with Valerie. That detail, her mother admitted, struck her as strange. There was more. On the evening of June 7th, the same day Valerie disappeared, Patrick and his wife stopped by the Tyndall home. During their visit, Patrick casually suggested that Valerie might have run away and might never return. His comment, seemingly out of nowhere, raised alarms in hindsight. Then came the most troubling revelation. Valerie's mom mentioned that Patrick had been tracking Valerie's phone through a special app. He claimed it was for work purposes. But detectives immediately spotted a glaring inconsistency. If Patrick had access to Valerie's real-time location, why did he text her multiple times that day asking, "Where are you?" The contradiction didn't sit right with investigators. With all the mounting details, his ever-changing story, the texts, the tracking app, and his oddly close relationship with Valerie, the detectives were nearly certain Patrick was involved in her disappearance. Still, they were missing a key piece: physical evidence. Valerie had not yet been found, and without a body, they couldn't file murder charges. But Patrick had broken the law. He'd lied during a criminal investigation, and that gave detectives just enough to act. They arrested him for making false statements, a calculated move designed to apply pressure. They hoped the weight of an arrest might finally crack him open. Patrick continued to deny any involvement in Valerie's disappearance. Detectives knew they needed a warrant to search his property, but without hard evidence, the process dragged on for months. Then, a new lead surfaced. Several of Patrick's neighbors reported something deeply suspicious. The night after Valerie vanished, around 2 a.m., they saw him dismantling and burning his garage. In the dark, under the cover of night, flames rose from the property, an odd time for home renovation. Finally, on October 11th, investigators obtained the warrant they had long been waiting for. Patrick's home sat on a large piece of rural land, with a pond at its center. As the search began, 4 cadaver dogs were brought in, and all 4 alerted near the water, signaling the scent of human remains. But divers found nothing in the pond. Forensics experts explained that if a body had once been placed nearby, the scent could have leached into the water over time. With this possibility in mind, investigators widened their search across the entire property. They brought in aerial support, a helicopter equipped with ground-penetrating radar, and used the data to create a detailed map highlighting several areas where the earth had been disturbed. Given the size of the land, The search stretched on for weeks. Then, on November 28th, attention shifted to a large mound of construction debris mixed with dirt. As crews sifted through the pile, they uncovered 2 wooden crates buried beneath the rubble. The first contained a strange collection of VHS tapes and documents. The contents have yet to be made public. But the second crate held a devastating discovery: human remains sealed inside black garbage bags. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, visual identification was impossible. But detectives quickly noticed a detail that gave them pause. The fingernails were painted the same color Valerie had worn on the day she vanished. The remains were sent to the medical examiner. Soon, the forensic results confirmed what everyone had feared. The body belonged to 17-year-old Valerie Tyndall. With this confirmation, authorities formally charged Patrick with her murder. He was brought in for another round of questioning, and this time, with the evidence stacked against him, he no longer denied his involvement. Yet again, however, his story raised serious doubts. Patrick claimed that he had met Valerie that day near the Shelbyville apartment complex for work. Afterward, he said, they returned to his home, where he also kept his office. It was there, he alleged, that things spiraled out of control. According to his version, Valerie had been trying to seduce him and began blackmailing him that day, demanding a new car in exchange for her silence. If he refused, she allegedly threatened to accuse him of inappropriate conduct and ruin his life. Panicked, Patrick claimed, he lashed out. What began as a heated argument turned physical. In a moment of desperation, he said, he grabbed his belt and strangled her. After the murder, Patrick moved her body into his office and left it there overnight. The next day, he went to a store, bought wooden planks, and built 2 makeshift coffins. One for Valerie's body, and the other for a collection of old documents and VHS tapes. He wrapped her remains in garbage bags and sealed them with duct tape to mask the smell, then lowered the crates into a pit on his property. To conceal the burial site, he used piles of construction debris and covered them with soil. The purpose behind Patrick's decision to burn down his garage remains uncertain, but the timing raised alarm bells. He set the fire in the middle of the night, just hours after Valerie vanished. Investigators suspect the blaze may have been a smokescreen, masking his true intent: to destroy incriminating evidence tied to the murder. Equally chilling was the location where Valerie's body was eventually found, just 100 yards from her parents' home. For nearly 6 months, her family had been searching, unaware that she had been buried so close. When detectives asked Patrick how he felt after killing Valerie, his response was disturbingly indifferent. He said that nothing in his life had really changed. To investigators, his story reeked of manipulation. Patrick continued to paint himself as a victim, claiming that he acted only after Valerie allegedly blackmailed him. But detectives found this explanation unconvincing. A far more plausible theory was that Patrick, who had grown increasingly close to Valerie over time, had developed an unhealthy fixation. On the day of the murder, he likely brought her to his home under the pretense of work. At some point, he may have made an unwanted advance, and when Valerie refused, he panicked. Fearing she would tell someone, he chose to silence her permanently. Valerie's family also cast serious doubt on Patrick's claims. According to her loved ones, she adored her car. She'd even said she wanted to drive it for the rest of her life. The idea that she would blackmail someone for a new one seemed absurd. Following Patrick's arrest, detectives unearthed even more damning evidence. A forensic review of his smartphone revealed that, shortly after returning home on the day of the murder, he began deleting various apps. But he overlooked one crucial piece of digital evidence: his health app. The app recorded a sharp spike in Patrick's heart rate for several minutes shortly after he arrived home. Investigators believed that this was the moment he murdered Valerie and began disposing of her body. Patrick also confessed to discarding Valerie's license plates and car keys in a nearby river, hoping to delay the discovery of her vehicle and throw investigators off track. One especially chilling detail emerged during his confession. After using his belt to strangle Valerie, Patrick casually looped it back through his pants and wore it as if nothing had happened. For Valerie's parents, the revelation that their neighbor and family friend was the killer came as a crushing blow. Despite Patrick's odd behavior, they had never truly believed he was involved. Detectives had kept most details of the investigation confidential to protect the integrity of the case, so Valerie's family only learned the full extent of what had happened after Patrick's arrest. Once in custody and appointed a public defender, Patrick made no effort to withdraw his confession. Instead, he and his attorney moved to negotiate a plea deal. Patrick would plead guilty to murder, and in return, the original charge for giving false statements would be dropped. As a result of the agreement, Patrick stood before a judge on March 11, 2024, just months after his arrest, and received a 57-year prison sentence. While this spared the Tyndall family the pain of a lengthy trial and the emotional toll of hearing defense arguments attempting to justify the crime, the plea deal carried a painful consequence. It required only that Patrick admit guilt in the murder, nothing more. This meant Valerie's parents might never learn the full truth about what happened that day. Investigators' theory may be the most plausible, but without a full confession, the gaps may never be filled. Patrick's family was equally shaken by the truth. His wife and children, including a daughter who had once been close friends with Valerie, had lived just a few yards from where her body lay buried, unaware for nearly 6 months. One final mystery still haunts the case. Alongside Valerie's remains, Patrick had buried a second wooden crate, filled with VHS tapes and documents. Because of the plea deal, he was never required to explain what those tapes contained. It's entirely possible they held further incriminating material, evidence of other wrongdoing that Patrick feared might come to light if police searched his home. Now, with Patrick serving a lengthy sentence, those tapes may remain the case's most unsettling, unanswered question. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time.